Welcome to the Leadership Labs with Deep.ai, a podcast where we delve into the fascinating world of deep tech entrepreneurship, company founders and venture capitalists. I'm your host, Anthony Kelly, and I'm thrilled to have you join us in this exciting journey. In each episode, we explore the minds behind groundbreaking technologies, the visionaries who dare to push the boundaries of innovation, and the investors who fuel the growth of tomorrow's game changers. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Leadership Labs. I'm your host Anthony Kelly and today's guest is coming all the way from Ireland. Second one we've had here, we've Gráinne McKnight. I've had previously Fionn, so really representing the Irish names on the podcast. Gráinne is a founding data science lead at Spoke.ai in Berlin, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you on the podcast, Gráinne. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, delighted to be here, and so nice to hear someone who can pronounce my name just correct. It's funny, actually, I have 5 brothers, and one of them's called Fionn, as it happens, but the rest are Oisín, Tréloch, Tadhg, and Tiernan, so full representation of Irish names there.
Yeah, I know Oisín. Oisín's in Berlin as well, right?
Yeah.
And also in data science.
Yeah, he's data analytics lead now at a startup called Kittel in Berlin.
Yeah, I know them. Good company, quite like Spoke, also moving towards a bit of Gen AI now.
Yeah, and hopefully they have a lot of energy, and I feel like we do too, so exciting times.
Good. Well, look, let's take it back, Gráinne. Let's talk about you, your journey into data science. Now, I've come from Ireland, so I know it's. I mean, we would say diversity is hard anywhere, but I would see it particularly being a little bit more of a disparity in Ireland than Central Europe, for example. It's not where ladies seem to go for education. What got you to head down the road of we'll start off and even say software, maths into data science?
Yeah, good question. So as I mentioned, I have loads of brothers, and one of the younger ones recently asked me, how did you know you wanted to be a data scientist? And my answer was I didn't, because I never grew up thinking, oh, hey, I want to be a data scientist. It's more something that I fell into and then learned that I really enjoyed. But when I was younger, I really enjoyed mathematics, and in secondary school in Ireland, as you're familiar with, you're suddenly faced at the age of 18 with a whole lot of choices of what to study and not a lot of clue of what that actually means in terms of careers. And I decided to just stick with the subject I like best, which is maths, and I studied that and kind of then specialized into statistics. This was some time ago, not to belie my age, but at the time, data science was nowhere near a large field as it was. And typically, people who would now be called data scientists were sort of working as statisticians. The role was a little different. It was more theoretical and less software development and computer science based. But after I specialized in statistics, I looked around for jobs. I landed a job originally in Dublin in a sort of old school German bank, as it happens. And there I worked on sort of as a statistician, and realized I really enjoyed the implementation side of it as well. So the software development, and wanted an adventure. So one day took up and left and moved to Berlin to work for N26, which at that point was scaling up. It was really exciting to join. And there I was my first official role as a data scientist. And I absolutely loved it. So stayed in that role ever since, over the past 6 years.
Nice. And then that took you on to Adyen. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I don't know that I say it right because even though I lived in the Netherlands and my partner is Dutch, my pronunciation of Dutch words, or like words or associated words, is not great. But yeah, Adian, I moved there after 2 years in N26, and wanted to try, like, Adian is still a relatively young company and has also a nice energy, but wanted to try a slightly larger organization where I could learn from more experienced data scientists and also data science leaders, because, it's the whole cohort is so young in data science that it's quite rare to come across people who've worked in the field for a long period of time. So I worked there for a while. And then 2 years ago, some former colleagues of mine from N26 reached out because they were founding a startup. That startup was Spoke.ai, and asked me to join. And I joined. I missed the whole startup energy, and I really wanted to build something from the ground up, from scratch. Plus, the colleagues that reached out to me, I had worked with them and I knew they were great. So it was an easy decision.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would imagine you knew you were getting yourself into a much different scenario than N26, right? They were they were a company that went from like 100 to 3,000 in like 3-4 years. Um,
Yeah.
you can never expect that. You cannot expect that from Spoke AI. It's just not right. So, what I was trying to ask is even you worked with the colleagues, startup environment. What was the feeling like coming in and knowing what you were going to be doing, the challenges that you were going to be facing again?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it cuts both ways, right? It's very exciting, but it's also, you know that there's almost certainly going to be some mini disaster almost every day, and that you have to deal with it. That there's no one to turn around to and say, "Hey, can you look at this?" But personally, I really enjoyed that. I think it's important after extended periods of doing that to take a break and to do other things. But that's part of it. I think it's also because it's an exciting environment, it attracts a lot of talented young people. And so you get to work with some great people, which I think is definitely one of the most important things in any career, is just really enjoying the people you work with.
Nice, nice, good, good. So let's talk about that founding data science experience, right? Even more so, company aside, responsibility coming into Spoke AI is definitely going to be a lot more. You're the founding data scientist. There's, don't want to say big expectations. Maybe they don't set big expectations, but you would definitely put them on yourself. What was that like? And then I guess if we can focus on like maybe month 0 to 3 or 6, and then talk about how it's progressed.
Yeah. So when I joined, there were the three founders, Carl, Max, and Jack, and two engineers who were working remotely, and I think a working student also at the time. So I was one of the first just to join in the Berlin office. So the first month 0 to 3, it was really a lot of brainstorming and delving into the user research and working closely on what actually we were going to build. And we knew from the very beginning we were going to be working with large language models. And at that time, 2 years ago, these were not as trendy as they are now. And not as good. I still remember the first tests we did with them. So a lot of my first months was getting familiar with how to work with these models, everything from like testing and evaluating responses from them, tuning, like fine tuning certain models. And it was kind of a completely new area for me. So it was quite exciting. And so that was a big part. And then the third major part was building the bigger team. So we're at a size of 16 now, and that is mostly engineering or product people, and we product design, that is, and we really like of course, put a lot of effort into hiring the best people. So that was a lot of work also from month 0 to 3 and then months 3 to 6. I think months 3 to 6, I got a working student on to help me with the data science stuff. So that was great. What I also started to do at that time was try to lay the groundwork for robust development practices on the data team. So things like setting up, code checks before deploy, etc. So that I knew that if I didn't do them now and enforce them now, that they would never likely get enforced for years, and then some future developers would be cursing me. So I invested some time then to do that.
Is that some experience with hypergrowth and N26 coming through?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine they ballooned for sure. I wanted to ask about the working students again. The importance of it. Did that allow you to just alleviate yourself? And I know this is a pretty crappy thing to say, but you could then separate your time into low value activity and high value activity, and you were able to be more focused on that sort of high value stuff.
100%. And I think like it's an important part of building a team is recognizing where you're spending a lot of time and where it maybe doesn't best suit your role or your skills. So as an example, later in our journey, we recently hired a Python engineer onto our team. And the reason we did this is we were doing a lot of pure software engineering work. Myself and the others on the data team, we are not the best specialized in that area. So we decided to hire someone specialized at that to help free up some time for us to do more of the AI focused work. So yeah, I think it's really important. I also think it's important for a second reason, which is just to have somebody to talk to in all senses of the word. So like, I think a lot of my time is spent explaining things to other people, and it's really nice to be able to, debate product ideas and discuss implementation with somebody who understands and has the same context as you do. And it also helps to clarify your own ideas when you have to discuss them with someone else on your team or with someone when you assign a task to them, etc. For example, the process of writing a ticket, I think, is a painful process, but a very useful process because it helps you think about what you're actually trying to achieve, and it helps like you clarify what are the like end expected user value from whatever product or feature the ticket is tackling. Whereas if you're working by yourself, of course, unless you're very organized, you usually don't write tickets for yourself.
Yeah. No, I remember the first 8 weeks in DBRAC in the office by myself. And I look back at it, and I guess you can kind of relate to it as emotional baggage. And I don't mean like social baggage or lack of social baggage. It just becomes a very weird place to be without having a colleague or a friend, particularly someone who's going to speak your language, unless you go home to someone who's like an experienced data scientist and you start telling them your problems. It's just not gonna hit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask as well, because as you've mentioned yourself, you didn't come into a computer science background. You don't have a massive programmer background from college until moving into post statistics. But it's very common now, people come from all different types of backgrounds by maths, astrophysics, moving into data science. But it's the journey that gets you there that I like to hear about, picking up skills, picking up tricks. And you've come from Trinity into now a founding data scientist and a lead of people for almost 4 years. You didn't study to be a lead. You didn't study to be a data scientist. So naturally, there's a lot of learn on the job stuff, right? So Talk to me about that experience from students to people responsibility.
Yeah. Now that you say it, it's like such a big journey because when I studied and at Trinity maths, and actually I think it's still relatively similar now, it's not a particularly applied course, so it's quite abstract and uh, I think almost all of my lectures were written on blackboards. I took notes on paper and pen. I did a computer science exam on pen and paper, so it was not exactly in terms of technical applied skills a place where I learned those. But I guess what I did learn there, well, first the note taking. I think I learned the importance of documentation because when you're studying math, I think for me at least, to be able to understand it, I had to write it out. Through the process of writing it out, I began to understand it. And I see the same now in any product that we or feature that we embark on. We start with documentation and the process, kind of like what I was saying with the ticket, the process of documenting it kind of clarifies it for us. So that was one thing. I also guess I learned that I enjoyed solving problems, which I think most people do, of course. But I really learned how to sit with a problem and tackle it, and extremely hard ones. I think beyond that, yeah, everything mostly was learning on the job. I have, of course, done some learning outside. So I've done some, evening courses here and there. I recently, for example, have been doing a Flutter development course, which is for front end development, just because I find it interesting. But I actually learn best by being faced with some sort of emergency situation and having to do something. So when I landed at N26, I was really lucky to have a great mentor who was a data scientist there, Edu. He's now at Revolut, and I learned a lot from him. So I would sit right beside him, watch him work. I learned lots of little tips and tricks. And because of that experience, I've made sure as a lead to encourage pair programming and mob programming so that you really learn by working alongside someone, not just telling someone to go off and learn it by themselves. And it also gives a space to learn those smaller tips and tricks that you don't necessarily learn, like, oh, this horrible Git disaster happens. And as it happens, I just happen to be old enough to have experienced a lot of them, so I can help someone else out with it. So I think it's mostly that, of course, using the internet. Back in the old days, I would say using Stack Overflow, and now more and more ChatGPT. And it's still something I use daily to help me with stuff. As a concrete example, I was trying to do something on AWS the other day around IAM profiles. I had no clue how to do it. I could have Googled it, but I used ChatGPT because I knew I would get the answer quicker in a nicer format than trying to find it in the Google search results.
Yeah, it's a big difference now where you have to piece together information from multiple sites, right? I think it's the difference is now it's now 10 months later socially acceptable to use ChatGPT. I have clients that will allow people to use ChatGPT in their programming exercises, in pair programming exercises. Like, yeah, use it as you would if you use GPT, if you use Git, whatever. Just go and use it. Which, let's be honest, that's what someone would do if they were to join.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask because it's something that I face a lot myself, and I understand when you say you had mentors in N26, you were keen. I was super keen. I was actually asking so many questions when I had my first job that I was told, just wait bundle your questions, write them down, and come to me at once, because I was constantly out of my seat. I was coming over. I was like, I want to know this. I want to know this. Why are you doing this? Why you say, like, what's the reason behind everything? Now, as a leader, a mentor, a coach, I want people to learn that way. They don't come to you with questions. So this skill can be harder to develop due to less will. How or has that been a challenge for you?
Yeah, I guess I think there can be two, in my experience leading people, I think there can be two ways this asking for help can go wrong. One is when someone sits with a problem themselves for too long, they spend, their entire day trying to solve it, and they finally reach out to you, and by the point they've reached out to you, they're near emotional breakdown, and then they've made a mess. So that's when I think I would say, no, ask sooner. But then, of course, some people, as a default, just sort of ask straight away. I'm guilty of that myself sometimes too, because it's so easy to just type and ask and avoid having to do the thinking or the retrieving of information yourself. But I think I read somewhere at one point about a rule of thumb, which is if you face a problem, try sit with it for at least an hour. And if you're still stuck, then reach out to somebody. So I think something like that can work well. It's something I've said before for like concrete debugging issues. But if it's more of a question situation, I guess it's spend 5 minutes trying to answer the question yourself. And if you can't, then maybe ask someone about it. 5 minutes might be a bit short depending on the question, but
Yeah.
you get the idea.
Yeah, and it's always a tough one to sort of get right. A lot of people say, oh, it's just our culture to do this. But it's always a place that is covered with unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. And you definitely don't know if people who you feel responsible for are struggling with a question, a topic, and they don't ask because they don't want to seem like they don't know it when they feel like they should know it. I know there's no silver bullet answer, but no,
No.
I like that, and I definitely think it becomes, as a leader, you almost have to set a safe learning environment for sure. But then, how do you articulate that to become almost like a framework?
Yeah.
If you know, let me know.
Yeah, I don't know. If you know, if you discover it, let me know.
Yeah, it's tough. But I did want to also ask you about product, and again, not something a lot of people from a data science or ML background talk about product market fit, but not necessarily about, on the topic of culture, incorporating a product mindset into your data science team's culture. So what I wanted to ask you is having a product mindset, it can help machine learning teams with better aligning with the business's goals and the user needs. And you spoke about the importance of it, but how do like the smaller connecting dots beyond connecting keywords work?
Yeah. I mean, it's also a tricky one because it's kind of an abstract concept, like what is a product mindset? But one phrase I forget who said this to me, so forgive me for not citing them, but they said, love the problem you're trying to solve and not the technology problem that a lot of startups have, which is they need to pivot quite a lot, and then you have to leave some of the technology you've developed behind, and it feels quite sad. And this person mentioned this phrase because they said, of course, you can take pleasure out of sticking with the same problem, but just switching the technology if you're in love with the problem. But I think if you apply that to everything you do, it makes a lot of sense, right? I think it can be very easy as a data scientist to fall in love with your model and really want to get it. Let's say you're building something that is accuracy is the measure used to evaluate it, and you just want to make it more and more accurate, and you lose sight of what you're actually, the problem is that you're trying to solve with this model. And maybe you've already solved the problem and you don't need to keep improving the accuracy, or you've solved it sufficiently. So I think it's having that mindset always brings you back to what is the problem you're trying to solve for users, and makes you continue questioning, am I trying to solve it? Is this the right way to solve it? Or is this me tweaking with the technology because I really enjoy it? There's space for that too. But I think the main focus, of course, should be on the problem at hand.
Nice. And you've come from different types of businesses now to get a flavor for it, right? You've joined N26, where people were coming in and people were going, I would say, at an extremely rapid rate. Agian, a little bit more middle road. And now you're in as that founding team, founding data scientist in Spoke.ai. You can completely connect with the product. You didn't have a data scientist to sit beside to just talk data. When you went for lunch, it was probably with the product people, the sales guys, who like all they talk about is what their customer needs. They won't get your jargon beyond it, right? They'll get buzzwords. So you've had that ability to carve out the close to the product team. Like, how has that benefited you working in data science? Really, I guess we can put it down to good stakeholders, because your product people will be ultimately your best friends in a startup. Regardless, in a 16-person business, it's going to happen. But like, how has that benefited you? What worked well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely number one thing is just pure enjoyment, because I enjoy working with people who are, yeah, from different backgrounds, and the team at Spoke are absolutely wonderful. That's number one. And I guess it's kind of cheesy, but it's also really important, because I think if you enjoy that aspect of your work, then you feel so energized for everything else, and it helps across the board, right? So I think that's one benefit. But of course, yeah, it also being close, particularly to, like, we've two product designers, and also one of the founders, Jack, actually a couple of the founders are often involved in the user research calls, and they also like user onboardings and the check-ins with our beta users, etc. So they're very close to our users, which is really nice. And often in larger companies, the people who are close to the users are really far away from the data scientists. But as you mentioned, I am going to lunch with these people, etc. So I get to hear secondhand, like directly, a lot of the experience users are having with their product, and a lot of the research about the problems user have. And that helps think about all the features we're building with data science. We also on Spoke, when they have user research calls, often you're like the wider team is invited to also join. So I've also personally joined some user research calls, which is really nice, because you also get to ask about your, the features, your favorite features, and what they think of them.
And then you realize your favorite feature is the one they use the least.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So I think that's a really big advantage. And I think it's also, it works both ways, because product design, of course, more and more, like not just within Spoke, but everywhere, we'll have to think about how the experience of AI products should be for users. And that's kind of new. Like, of course, there have been data science products around for a while, but often they've been sort of behind the scenes, like what I used to work on fraud detection models or customer service chatbots. And now it's more like in your face. And I think it's very different. And product designers are learning, along with the rest of us, how to design products to best, like, to best use an AI rather than, give users a bad experience with AI.
Nice. You mentioned sitting in on product user groups. I believe breaking down the walls per team should just be normal, right? It sounds like the smart thing once you're doing it. What other, or do you do anything else to sort of break those barriers down so that you said you're getting secondhand communication, sometimes firsthand, like the closer to the actual truth, because we're talking about data here. The closer to the actual data you can get, the better. Has there been any other examples where you've done other things to get close to the product?
Well, I mean, we have the great advantage that because we're building a communication tool for the workplace, that we use it all day, every day. And so, I mean, we're really close with it. I mean, I'm amazed I don't dream about it more because I'm building it and then using it to build. And we have, of course, like a staging and production environment. So I have two ongoing tools. But I mean, that's just, we happen to be lucky in that way. But I do think if it's possible to use the tool you're building, that's the best. I mean, when I worked at N26, of course, I was also a customer, still am.
You're telling me you're an Irish person that doesn't use Revolut?
I do. I probably shouldn't admit this on the podcast, but I do also have Revolut. But I still prioritize N26 over Revolut. But yeah, I think like using the N26 app itself, of course, while I worked there, I had a lot of insights. And I think sometimes you can feel like, oh, this is just my experience of using this app and I shouldn't share it with the product team. But like, everyone's always desperate for user feedback and it's all welcome. So we have a product ideas channel on Slack, for example, where everyone is just constantly throwing in their own ideas, often from their own experience, but sometimes also from talking about it with a friend. Sometimes when I talk about it with my partner, he'll suggest something and I'll like ping it in. So I think that's important, having a culture where everybody feels comfortable to make suggestions about the product. I think in terms of breaking down the barriers between teams, we work very cross-functionally. I mean, we're super small, but we have one big cross-functional team and we break our stand-ups into 2 teams. And on those teams, there's like front-end, back-end, data, and a QA engineer working across both those. And so we like work daily with the team. And I think, again, it's hard to know how much of this is a luxury because we're still small. We really start off each project with documentation, working together on trying to come up with how the product looks like. Whereas my experience in larger companies was more of data scientist as a service type feeling, where the product would be designed and then people would come to you and say, do this. And there would be not as much engagement in the actual design, like technical or product design.
Yeah, I like that. I like the rigor that has actually been put into place to keep those walls down. You know, it takes some doing. I mean, we're probably in a world now where there's not many scale ups or large companies that have operated like that from inception, where we can actually see how those long term benefits would actually play out. But I mean, it definitely sounds like something, you know.
Yeah.
Now,
agreed.
I want to ask you now again, and you can take it back from Trinity again, or coming from job to job, but you don't get a product mindset studying maths in Trinity. You personally don't get one. A lot of engineers are studying maths, software engineering, computer science. They don't get it. They're just told tech is number one. Tech is great. Python, TensorFlow, Gen AI, buzzword central. Use the coolest tech that will give you the best results and the best value, but which isn't true. But how do you try to transition, or how have you even transitioned from that sort of background to be very product focused?
Yeah, I guess part of it is just experience, and not just work experience, right? But life experience. The more you've done, I think, in your life, and the more people you've talked to and places you've been, I think that that gives you this experience that puts you as like an end user or a target audience of a lot of things, and gives you a lot of context of what will work and what doesn't. Because, I mean, I've used so many products over my life. So I think that's part of it, is just getting out there and doing things with your life. And it sounds kind of silly, but I do think it is. And thinking about, like, what are the problems you experience in your day-to-day life? I mean, and then, like, what products are out there trying to solve that? And I think just beginning to think in that way is one way of approaching it. I think also thinking deeply about the products you do love, and just sort of basking in sort of enjoyment of them. For example, I mean, Git as a technology is fantastic, and I love GitHub as a product. And I just spend some time sometimes just looking at GitHub and just being like, this is so cool. Like, because it's such a complex problem. And I mean, of course, there's ways they could and should improve. And they still are. What I also admire about GitHub is that even under Microsoft, they are like really improving quite a lot, and pushing changes quite frequently, which is nice. And so just kind of appreciating, like, how they do things. I think another company that I have been admiring lately is like Linear, which we use instead of Jira, for example, and seeing how quickly they develop and how the design is just very seamless and nice and easy to use is sort of an inspiration. So I guess finding sources of inspiration, if I was to boil it down to a point. Yeah.
So you know what, it's good because there is actually a real value takeaway out of that. If you have data scientists and machine learning engineers, you can ask them, what is your favorite software and why? And then try and get them to understand that journey that they're on when they use it, and say, how do we take our users on that journey? If they say, I don't know, well, I'm going to call it product maturity, right? Because we don't want to just, we don't want to put age into it and say, when you get mature, you just start to appreciate how functional things are, which is true. But yeah, no, definitely a really good way to bring it in. Do you look at attributes or qualities in people, like, to see if they could grow or bring a good product mindset to the team?
100%. I think, of course, at different stages of a company, often you need different people at different, stages in a product life cycle. You need different people with different skills. But I think almost universally at an early stage startup, you do need people with somewhat of a product mindset. And I definitely, as part of the interviewing process, look for that. Look for how whatever challenge that we give them or questions, how they respond, keeping the user in mind, how they think about the actual impact and how to measure the impact on the user. It's always sort of a section within the whole process.
I want to round it up with some quick fire questions, Grania. Don't think too much into them. Shoot your first answer. I'm going to guess one of these for sure. But what are your three?
I guess the first, and the one that I found quite hard myself to learn, is to make decisions. Ideally, they're the right decisions, but even so, just making a decision. So the cost of not making a decision often can be worse than the cost of making a bad decision. And it drains a lot of energy. So just being willing to say, let's do this, let's do that. I think another is communication and finding the medium that best suits your own communication and really leaning into it. So Christian, who's product designer who works with us, he does these fantastic async videos where he basically does an async product refinement with the whole team. And it's so good. That wouldn't suit me particularly, but everyone has their own type of medium, and leaning into that and finding that, I think, is a non-negotiable. And the third, I guess, is what I'll repeat because I think it's worth repeating, is falling in love with the problem and not the technology. I mean, you can definitely keep the technology on the side, but I think product should be your one true love, or the problem should be your one true love.
Nice. Knew that one was coming.
Yeah.
Or I was just going to be very shocked. Is there any sort of book, podcast, or content that you've really learned from, or something you would recommend to other leaders?
Yeah, I love podcasts. So extra delighted to be on one. But one I recommend is Hard Fork from the New York Times. It covers general tech topics and developments. It's often sort of both the inside mechanics of working in tech companies, but also updates about new releases. And of course, the last year has a lot been focused on developments in AI. And yeah, it's quite nice. There are two hosts, and they kind of joke around with each other quite a lot, and they often have interesting guests. It's great to stay updated with AI developments and other developments in regulation, etc. So that one's great. I think in terms of books, I think it's hard to write books fast enough to keep up with the developments, but I'm sure there are some. I think Pragmatic Programmer is a book just great for developing. It's not quite on the product mindset, but it's just great at developing pragmatic engineering skills, which I think apply even if you're not an engineer, although it is very engineering focused. So if you're not an engineer, maybe hesitate before you buy it. But it is a great book for learning how to be pragmatic. And then I think in terms of other content, I quite like newsletters. However, they can be quite overwhelming when you get like hundreds in your email. So I think choosing the really good one is important. One I really like at the moment is the Neuron, which is again specifically focused on AI, but it often showcases new AI products, for example, that have come out and that you can go and explore, which are quite interesting.
Nice. And I'll wrap it up with a tough one. If you were to go back and change something about your career or your education, whether it's something you've done or something you would like to do a little bit differently, what would it be?
Yeah, it is tough. I'm not a big regrets person, but I guess, I mean, I guess I would have made, I mean, been less wary about exploring and trying different things, like just putting myself out there in terms of trying different jobs, etc. I think the first role I chose, which as I mentioned was in this kind of old school bank, was a function of me not really knowing what to do and just kind of doing what I saw other people around me doing. Now, I really enjoyed it and I learned a lot, and I sort of learned what I liked in that role. So I don't regret it, but maybe if I had been a bit more open to exploration at that point, I could have ended up here quicker, or I could have had some other alternative cool experience in between. So yeah, maybe that.
Excellent. And that does us for time. Absolutely great speaking to you. Anyone looking to contact her, Gráinne McKnight, check her out on LinkedIn. It's been a cracking episode. Thanks a million for your time, Gráinne.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That concludes another enlightening episode of the Leadership Labs podcast. If you found today's episode thought-provoking and informative, be sure to subscribe to the Leadership Labs on your preferred podcast platform or on YouTube. Thank you once again for joining us on this journey through the Leadership Labs. Until next time.